some kind of a standing. But most people who talk to, they'll think, oh, it's a Jholawala sector. So the best way to pivot doesn't happen, but there's a conducive platform that we offer you that we believe is a good way to pivot. And finally, the approach. So you spoke about the systems approach, and I want to end with this, that the social sector is inherently complex. It is tough, it is difficult, because problems are interconnected. I was speaking to Anand and Daniel in the morning about construction of toilets. It's not building a toilet. It's about, is there running water? Who is using it? How? And we all know about the problems that Swachh Bharat has faced. So a systemic approach, bringing together human, technological dimensions are important. I think somebody spoke about technology in education. Me and my colleague Nupur, we are now working on how to look at digital transformation. So these are not separate things, right? Everything needs to be brought together to have a systems lens to it, so that problem structuring, I love that word more than problem solving. Again, my point of view, cannot solve a problem, because once you solve a problem, you're out of a job, right? But how do you understand the problem becomes the key, and that's the whole essence of the social sector that we believe in. So thank you, enriching. I hope we're able to at least scratch the surface today at the end of the workshop. And at this point, I'm going to call upon Anu Prasad. Is Anu there? I think Manish has just arrived, maybe grabbing a cup of tea. And Anu is our founder. So Anu is there. I was about to introduce you, but Anu founded ILSS 6 years ago. She has been a founding team member of the Ashoka University. And we're privileged to have Manish and Ram with us today. And Anu, I call her on stage to speak a few words and introduce Manish. Thank you, Anu.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome, Manish. Do you want to put up? So, I mean, I don't think I need to read out Manish's introduction, but mota moti, I would say, I mean, Vice Chairman of Team Lease Services, serves on various policy committees, for education, employment and employability, independent director on the board of RBI, member of the advisory board for the CAG, and of course, the governing board member of the National Council of Applied Economic Research. Delighted to have you here, Manish. I actually spoke to him last week, and I said I heard a podcast recently, which I think I would recommend everyone to hear. It's by Rahul Ahluwalia. It's the Fed podcast, so check it out on YouTube, where Manish spoke eloquently about many things. But I think some things that really stuck out with me were how to be a good ancestor. As simple as that, how to be a good ancestor. I mean, we are all here trying to see what is the role we can play as active citizens in civil society. And I think the way he put it was so beautiful. And also was really keen. In the podcast, he didn't go down on that, but I'm hoping to hear more on that, was really the role that three sectors can play. The government, of course, plays the major role. But as Manish says, there is an execution deficit in the government. In the private, there is a trust deficit, and in the social sector, there's a scale deficit. And then goes on to talk about how we need to build human capital for the social sector, because we have population scale problems, so require population scale solutions and certainly talent, which is what ILSS really wants to do. So we were so delighted, Manish, to have you here. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Thanks, Anu. It's a pleasure to be here. I work for a people supply chain company. We've hired somebody every 5 minutes for 25 years, but we've only hired 5% of the kids who came to us for a job. So if you think about it, that really summarizes the agony and ecstasy of India's labor market. The ecstasy is obvious. I'm a child of lower hiring standards. Kids getting a job with me today would not have got a job 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But economists might worry about the productivity impact of lower hiring standards, but from a public policy perspective, it's a it's a really good thing, right? I had a telecom client shouting at me saying, I have 200 sales positions open for 4 months. Why aren't you filling them up? I said, well, we're doing it for all your competitors. Your hiring standards are too high. So he called me back in a few hours and said, okay, I need a pair of hands. I don't care if a brain comes attached. We filled those 200 positions in a few hours. But economists might worry about that, right? Same job, lower hiring standards. What is the impact of skills? What's the impact of schools? But the agony wasn't as obvious to me till I started TeamLease. We had a job fair in Jaipur a few years ago, many years ago, and 80,000 kids showed up, and I met 800 of them myself. And I can guarantee if they were born in Delhi, Bombay, or Bangalore, they would have had a job. But they were born in Delhi, Dausa, Barmer, Jhunjhunu, or Ajmer. So the two most important decisions a child in India makes are to choose your parents wisely and to choose your PIN code wisely. All of you are laughing or sitting here because you did that, right? I mean, we were all born on the 10th floor. We don't always realize that. But why are the two most important decisions a child in India makes? Choosing your parent and PIN code wisely is probably the most interesting question of all times, right? And I think you've got to answer that question for yourself. But I think more upstream than that question is whether you believe that history is a social science or it's literature. I really think so as an entrepreneur, right? Because the social science view of history believes that people don't matter. It's all about circumstances. You know, Karl Marx, Tolstoy, Romila Thapar in some sense. But the literature view of history says that the history of the world is the biography of leaders. It's the biography of choices that leaders make. And, you know, that's more, you know, Andrew Roberts, Carlyle, of course, maybe even Ram Boha to some extent. But if you think about independence, right, let me frame that for you. A lot of people say India became independent in 1947 because the British were bankrupt, tired, and exhausted. You know, it was a matter of time before they left. I'm not sure. You know, between 1885 and 1915, the moderates were writing letters to the British saying that, you know, British rule is very un-British, so you should leave. You know, Gandhiji came back in 1915. 1917, there was Bardoli, then there was Champaran. 1919, there was civil disobedience. In 1929, there was the Purna Swaraj resolution. In 1931, there was the Round Table. In 1942, there was Quit India. In 1947, they left. It took a long time, but there was a series of choices made by people. And I think that that's really important when you think of sort of society level stuff, because it's really quite easy to blame things on culture. And I hate that, because cultural explanations for poverty are at best the soft bigotry of low expectations, and at worst they are racism, right? I mean, what the Hindu rate of growth was, I don't know whether you've heard of it. There was this idiot economist at the Delhi School of Economics, you know, between 1820 to 1950, India grew at 0.1%. And from 1950 to 1991, India grew at 2%. So there was this idiot at Delhi School of Economics who called it the Hindu rate of growth. But from 1991 till now, we've grown at 7%, and we didn't shoot all the Hindus. Clearly. So there was obviously an incomplete, if not a stupid or a racial explanation, which really is much more passive. I mean, what are you going to do about culture anyway if you believe it exists? So my view is that you have to step back and think about India. Obviously, countries are path dependent, right? What historians call path dependent. India sort of was two reckless experiments in 1947. One was political, one was economic. The political experiment has paid off spectacularly. You know, we have created the world's largest democracy on the infertile soil of the world's most hierarchical society. 3 million people in India win an election, 22 million people stand for an election. India and Pakistan, born on the same night, have obviously, that is the difference, right? 3 million people win an election. And for somebody born and brought up in Kashmir, that is a question, obviously, I think about a lot. But this reckless political experiment, which paid off, was accompanied by a reckless economic experiment. It was embodied in the 1955 Avadi resolution of the 1956 second five-year plan, which really took an engineering view of the economy, you know, people like Mahalanobis, and it was really codified in the second five-year plan, where you really viewed the economy as a machine almost, rather than a complex adaptive ecosystem. You viewed it as an engineering problem, you know, so you decided which lever you would pull and how that would work. It was a very sort of general equilibrium, physics envy, you know, kind of view of the economy, and that failed spectacularly. Right? our labor is handicapped without capital today, and our capital is handicapped without labor. It was really bred, in some sense, a low-level equilibrium for the economy, and we still sort of pay the price for that. But it wasn't God's will that it should take 72 years for 1.4 billion Indians to cross the GDP of 66 million Britishers, right? That's how long it took. And so in my view, what did we learn from that reckless economic experiment? Three things. One is obviously, there's no such thing as poor people. There are people in poor places, right? If an electrician who in Balasore in Odisha moves to Lucknow, you get 2 times more salary. Move from Lucknow to Bangalore, you get 4 times more salary. You move from Bangalore to Dubai, you get 8 times more salary. And then you move to Zurich in Switzerland, you get 25 times more salary. It is the same damn electrician, right? It's not, you can obsess about skills, but there is a 20, so it's really what you want to call the place premium, you want to call it the, whatever you want to call it. But there are people in poor places. Now, some of these places are physical, which city you live in, which state you live in, which country, but many of them are conceptual, which sector you work in, which firm you work in, and which skill you have. And I'll come back to this sort of because these 5 or 6 places have very different productivity implications. I think obviously the second lesson was GDP per capita matters much more than total GDP. Right? We're 5th in total GDP. In a few minutes, we'll probably be 3rd. There's only popcorn stands like Japan and Germany ahead of us, and we're almost there in total GDP. But we're 128th in per capita GDP. And what really matters to people's daily life, in some sense, is per capita GDP rather than total GDP. And the third one, which obviously I have always argued with economists, that we don't have a shortage of land, labor, and capital. So you've got to stop obsessing with that. You could give every Indian household half an acre, they would fit into Maharashtra and Rajasthan. We don't have a shortage of labor. 40% of our labor force is Vela. You don't have a shortage of capital when you deserve it. 50% of our foreign direct investment since 1947 has come in the last 7 years. 50%. So when you make yourself worthy, or people think that you've got a strong future, very often all the same, regulatory cholesterol or your bad infrastructure or bad skills get overcome, right? So what is the problem if you have enough land, labor, and capital? It's what economists call total factor productivity, which is how does this land, labor, capital combine? In an economy, how does land combine with labor, combine with capital to create, you can call it innovation, you can call it technology, you can call it entrepreneurship. Total factor productivity is a really complex economic concept, but it's a very simple common sense concept that entrepreneurship, innovation, technology are what really combine land, labor, and capital. And you've got to think of it that way. So if you step back and say we don't have a land, labor, capital problem, if you say that it's not a cultural problem, or if you accept my thesis that it's not a cultural problem, why do we have the problems we have? What makes it, back to my first question of sort of why our country is poor. I landed in the US in August 1994 for my MBA. By September, I was asking myself, these Americans aren't smarter than us. Why are they richer than us? I mean, clearly I can kick their ass individually in the classroom, but why does Joe Sixpack, who watches college football, drinks beer, make $55,000 a year? And why does Ram Bharose or whoever work 24 hours a day and make 50,000 rupees a year? The pathology is not at the level of the person. It's really the productive, poverty is about productivity, and productivity is really embedded at level above the individual. So it's really in 5 levels in my mind, which state you work in, which city you live in, which sector you work in, which firm you work in, and which skill you have. The state one is obvious, right? My dad lives in Kanpur, in UP, I live in Karnataka. Both states have the same GDP, but Karnataka does it with 1/4 the number of people. So city is obvious. I know many of you will crib about Bangalore traffic. I call it growth. It's probably the only city in India where a young kid from anywhere in India can move and whatever skill you have, you can have a job within a week. In fact, if everybody in India lived in Bangalore, then India's GDP would be more than China, right? Because India's GDP is $2,500 and Bangalore's GDP is $12,500. So clearly, the city which you live in really matters. But then you start getting complicated. Which sector you work in matters, right? IT is a wonderful gift to India's soft power, but it's a rounding error in India's labor market. It's 0.8% of India's labor force, but it generates 8% of GDP. While farms are 42%, maybe even 44% of the labor force, but they only generate 14% of GDP. So basically, people in farms are condemned to sort of poverty in some sense, because if 42% of labor force only generates 14%, while 0.8 generates 8, you will see the wage premium reflecting in that productivity. Which firm you work in really matter, and people don't realize that, India has 63 million enterprises. 12 million of them don't have an office. 12 million work from home. Only 12 million pay GST, are registered for GST. Only 8 million pay GST. Only 1 million pay Provident Fund and ESI. But there are only 27,000 companies in India with a paid-up capital of more than 10 crores. So 6.3 crore enterprises means jack shit if it translates to 27,000 companies with a paid-up capital of more than $1.2 million. You've got to think about that. Why do we only have 27,000 companies with a paid-up capital of $1.5 million? And why does this matter? Because there's a 24 times difference in productivity between India's largest and smallest firms. Now, if there's a 24 times difference in productivity, you'll never pay the wage premium. But if you never pay the wage premium, you will never be productive. So you're stuck in this low-level equilibrium where you have these millions of enterprises, but you don't have the productivity and the wage premium that really leads to the next level. So, what makes a country strong? One of my favorite Hindi poets is Ramdhari Singh Dinkar. Shama shobhati us bhujang ko jiske paas garal ho. Only the powerful can be kind, benevolent, and generous, right? What are the weak going to offer you? And India was economically weak for a really long time. And what is that? What is economically strong? I don't think strong is only economic, by the way. It's also political, right? So being strong as a nation combines mass democracy with mass prosperity. Right? China forced its citizens to choose between their wallets and their freedoms. India gave freedoms, but really kept empty wallets, right? And but it is possible to combine mass democracy with mass prosperity. And that is really, in my mind, what we didn't do. And they're probably sort of more than skills, more than luck. Dumbledore tells Harry Potter in Chamber of Secrets, it is our choices more than our abilities that reveal what we really are. And there are probably 5 choices in front of India that really will combine this mass prosperity with mass democracy. One, obviously, is urbanization. And it's not about urbanization happening. It's about good urbanization versus bad urbanization, right? Urbanization will happen anyway. But you can't take jobs to people in the short run. You have to take people to jobs. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Policy is the world, or the world is the world of life is second best at best. In an ideal situation, I'd love to take jobs to Balasore or to Unnao or to Barmer, but that's not going to happen. It's even hard to take them to Patna and Lucknow and Kanpur. How will you take them to the next level? So in the short run, you have to do that. But India only has 52 cities with more than 1 million people. China has 375 cities with more than we have 6 lakh villages. 2 lakh of those villages have less than 200 people. How are you going to take jobs to places with 200 people? And it's not, even if you're sort of like Stalin, Stalin in his diary wanted to send doctors to Vladivostok and all of them would run away. So he killed the first 2. After the 3rd time, he gave up because he said, even if I kill these doctors, they're not going to Vladivostok. So it's hard to imagine teachers and other, when I started TeamLease 25 years ago, the senior manager would ask me 3 things before taking a job about the location. Do you have a job for my spouse? Do you have a school for my kids? And do you have medical for my parents? Now the lowest worker asks you that job. The entry-level blue-collar worker will start asking those questions. So the notion that you can give tax incentives to Buddy and then Buddy will develop, it's not true. Buddy's tax incentives are gone and Buddy has disappeared. I used to have 20,000 employees in Buddy at one point in time. We probably have 400 now. So my sense is that you have to think about urbanization in different ways. If you have questions about it, it's really the decentralization of funds, functions, and functionaries. What is power in government? It's funds. You have to track funds, functions, and functionaries. In India, only 3% of total spending is done by cities. In China, 50% of spending is done by the third tier of government. In America, 50% of employment is at the third tier of government. In India, only 14% of employment is at the third tier of government. So I think good urbanization is a really important choice that we will have to make. Urbanization will happen anyway. But there are two kinds of urbanization, right? In megacities, which are cities with more than 10 million people, are an Asian innovation. In 1973, there were only 3 cities in the world, Tokyo, Mexico, and New York, which had more than 10 million people. Now there are 34 cities, of which 28 are in Asia and 12 are in India. Now, is a 20 million, 30 million city the right option? I mean, that seems to be the direction we're headed in. But urbanization is debatable on whether, NCR is a city, whether Delhi and Jaipur will become one thing, whether it's good to have Bangalore and Mysore become one city. So we've got to think about good and bad urbanization. I think formalization, I already made the point to you. Why do 63 million enterprises only translate to 27,000 companies? My case to you would be regulatory cholesterol. Right? We put out a report a few years ago. There's 67,000 compliances, 6,700 filings, and 26,000 ways for an employer to go to jail in India. Now, the interesting point is no employer is in jail, right? When we put out that report, everybody at the government got angry with me and called me and said, you're always talking about ease of doing business. Why not a single employer is in jail? So why are you putting out this report? And I said, one of my favorite lines in the Vishnu Sahasranam roughly translates to, why did God create fear? So he could take it away, right? The only reason to create fear is take it away. So what is corruption? Corruption is the transmission losses between how the law is written, interpreted, practiced, and enforced. So if the way the law is written has 26,000 ways to jail, private equity investors sitting in New York will look at the way the law is written, while haramis like us will look at how the law is interpreted, how it's practiced, how it's enforced, what is development? Development is moving from, deals to rules, right? Essentially. In India, if you follow a rule, you feel like you missed a deal, right? I mean, you should have called somebody or a consultant ko bulana tha, and that's very inefficient. At a national level, it leads to lower productivity because it leads to informalization and informal enterprises. So I think formalization is really important. I think formalization is very complex because now, after 20 years of doing this, I have concluded that ease of doing business is civil service reform. The 25 million civil servants in India, not necessarily the 6,700 IAS officers, but them included, right? And obviously having been born and brought up in Kashmir, I wish that Patel had won over Nehru on Kashmir. But on civil service, I wish Nehru had won over Patel, because Nehru used to say many times, the Indian civil service is neither Indian nor civil nor a service. While Patel's view of the civil service as a steel frame, I think the steel frame has now become a steel cage. There are 3-4 toxic civil service mentalities, prohibited till permitted. I mean, I can count 200 times I've been told by bureaucrats, who allowed you to do this? I mean, what does that even mean? I mean, is it prohibited? No. So it's not prohibited till permitted. Or drunk driving becomes an argument against cars. So you write the law for the chore, then if drunk drivers are there, you don't ban cars on the road, you figure out drunk drivers. But, and obviously the main problem with bureaucrats, I think, in my mind, is they're just too small for big things and too big for small things, right? You go to them for labor reform, they'll say, I go to parliament. You go to them with some chiller issue, they'll say, I go to that club 1,000 miles away. It's not my job. So I think that formalization has become civil service reform in some sense. Industrialization is a more complex one because manufacturing has changed. But, the peak of any country's labor in manufacturing was Britain in World War II, 45%. China peaked at 33%, America 11% is the wrong number, which India has. In the short run, Make in India is becoming Make for India. But I think we have to get our labor force in manufacturing from 11% to 17, 18%. Financialization is obvious. Capital really matters. Equity markets are doing well. 5 years ago, the Chinese MSCI index was China 36% and India was 8%. Now India is 18% and China is 22%. So we're almost equal to China in global asset allocation. And obviously the banking system is in the best health it's been, but we still need more capital to go into higher risk ventures. We have probably one of the most vibrant venture capital communities in the world after sort of US and Israel and a few other places, but it's still a long way to go before we can say that your connections and your capital don't matter in starting a company, but it has substantially changed. I mean, people like me who started both my companies with private equity and venture capital couldn't have done that, right? So the final one I would say is human capital. So there's urbanization, formalization, industrialization, financialization, and human capital. Let me jog your memory a little bit. 265 lakh kids take the class 10th exam every year, 105 lakh fail. 160 lakh kids take the class 12th exam, 80 lakh fail. Of the 80 lakh who pass class 12, 50 lakh go to college and 30 lakh disappear. I have been at many job fairs. I remember one distinctly in Gwalior where a BA in English kept shoving his certificate in my face. And I kept asking him questions in English. He kept answering me in Hindi. So I said, why are you answering me in Hindi? English is like Windows. It's an operating system. It's a vocational skill. Why are you answering me in Hindi? He said, आपको सच बताऊं sir, मैंने अपना BA English Hindi में किया है. Whatever you want me to write, hello, I'm not going to speak to you in English. So, I think that the nature of education, we got elite education right, but we didn't get primary education right, and we didn't get many other things right? The 1948 Radhakrishnan report, or the 1968 Kothari Committee report, or even the 1968 National Education Policy created this apartheid between education and employability. It didn't create modularity between certificates, diplomas, and degrees. And it just was too premature load bearing on children. In fact, I don't know, you should look up a wonderful speech by Gandhiji in 1934 called Nai Taaleem, where he says asking children to choose their subjects in class 10 is like child marriage. I mean, what do they know? So you really have to push this out later. But I think NEP 2020 has a lot of sort of changes which gets rid of the cholesterol. It recognizes interdisciplinarity. It gives colleges much more flexibility. At least it frees the world of vocational education. It recognizes apprenticeships. Long way to go, but at least we have now a 15-year roadmap for that. And now 2 foreign universities have already started. I don't think that we were ever going to rush. For universities aren't very global things. So, if you step back on sort of where I started, which was 2 reckless experiments, if you sort of think about the 5 choices, in my mind, I have chosen obviously a life of entrepreneurship, right? I mean, I think that that's important to think about as you think about institutions, because institutions really matter. And there's not that much difference between being a good entrepreneur in the private sector and being a good entrepreneur in the social sector and being a good entrepreneur in government. I really think so. But my own personal reflection is from direct experience, right? That entrepreneurs can create 2 kinds of companies, a baby and a dwarf. Both are small, but the baby is going to grow and the dwarf is going to stay there. The difference between a baby and a dwarf is not more food. It's not more money. It really is in DNA. And I can say that because my first company was a 50 crore company and my second company is 12,000 crores this year. I actually raised more money in my first company in the first round than I did in my second round. So it was clear that money was not the differentiator between the 2 companies. And I reflect often on what is the difference between, say, India Life, which was my first company, being only 50 crores, which I sold to Hewitt, and Team Lease, which I, did not take private equity for the first, 8 years because I was very angry with my private equity guys for making me sell my company and other things like that. But I think there is a distinct distinction between what I did at Team Lease and what I did at India Life. The first one was, and I think all of them are related to balance, right? It's the dose makes the poison, as Paracelsus used to say. Anything powerful enough to help has the power to hurt. But I think there were 4 kinds of balance between a baby and a dwarf, between the next quarter and quarter century. I think a 10-year plan is not 10 one-year plans. In India Life, our 10-year plan was 10 one-year plans, while in Team Lease, our 25-year plan was a 25-year plan. Maybe because we were older, maybe because we had money having sold our earlier company, maybe we recognized our mistakes. But it's really hard to balance, because if you only deliver the next quarter century, nobody's going to pay attention to you. If you only deliver the next quarter, then you're never going to do anything great. It's sort of like, balancing poetry and prose, which is my next point, right? My favorite politician is a guy called Mario Cuomo. He says, we politicians campaign in poetry, but we govern in prose. That's true for business plans. We write our business plans in poetry or do our IPO roadshows in poetry, but we execute them in prose. And I think that if you have too much poetry and no prose, you will do nothing. we know lots of bullshitters who, talk about their next venture but never get it done. But if you have too much prose and no poetry, you will do nothing great. So don't look down on poetry. I mean, that was our mistake in India Life, where we just, we were fresh MBAs. I had come out of Wharton. Ashok, my co-founder, came out of IIM Bangalore, and we were just focused on prose. And we lost a little bit of that poetry, which in TeamLease we did. We didn't, and so I think, in TeamLease we had that broader purpose. When we sold India Life, we said we wanted our next company to be three things. We wanted to be fun, profitable, and good for India, right? Because I had worked for an oil refinery before going to Wharton, and that was profitable and it was good for India. It wasn't really fun. Oil refineries are very boring places. Ashok's family has had a Coca-Cola franchise for many years. That is, I don't know whether anybody here works at Coke, too bad. But, the Coca-Cola franchise is fun and it's profitable, but I'm not sure it's good for India. And my dentist agrees with me. So, it's very hard to find things that are fun, profitable, and good, right? And we found something in TeamLease. And I think putting India to work, which is on our card, which is sort of, we did that before we started the company as our sort of mission. And I think that has made a difference. That's why we are a baby rather than a dwarf. Obviously, the third one is sort of diversity in the team. I think, as Steven Spielberg says, the team you choose is the company you build. And it's really important to not think about this as, don't hire people who look like you, don't hire people who do the same things as you. Ashok and me are completely opposite people. Ashok is an introvert, I'm an extrovert. Ashok is very good at operations, I'm good at selling. Ashok is very good at therapy sessions with cribbing employees. I make them cry. He's ugly, I'm good looking. I could go on. But our board members said something very interesting in our last board meeting, that if only Manish had been around, the company wouldn't have survived. And if only Ashok had been around, the company would have been 1/100th of its size. And I think both of us agree. I think that he sort of controls my worst instincts of, I've never met an acquisition I don't want to make. I've never met an investment I don't want to make. And he's this risk-averse middle-class Indian who never wants to make investments or acquisitions. So I think that balance between ambition and sort of prudence is a really important one. But the final difference between a baby and a dwarf, because I've sort of given you the good reasons, but there is an element of risk-taking. If you don't take risk, you're not going to be a baby. And we didn't take that much risk in India Life as we've taken at TeamLease. We built our IT systems up front. We invested. We hired very senior people up front who were not going to pay for themselves for 2 or 3 years. But that is primarily why. In fact, there's an interesting story I have from 10 years ago, when the CEO of the world's largest staffing companies called me on my phone and said, I want to come to Bangalore and see you. I said, sure, so why? He says, well, my general counsel says you're a bunch of kids who are going to go to jail. I said, I would love to meet you, sir. Because there's confusion around the Contract Labor Act on whether we're allowed to do what we did at that time. So he got on his private plane, it's a $30 billion or whatever, $20 billion company, and he came to Bangalore and sat down in a conference room. And he says, now tell me, what is your strategy? I said, so why do you keep asking me these basic questions? He says, because we've been in India for 10 years and we have 500 employees. You guys are 5 years old and you have 50,000 employees. I said, so first of all, you should sack your CEO. I didn't know you were in India. But we have a very simple strategy. In fact, there's an old story about Akbar where he sentences this guy to death. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to chop off your head. That guy says, Jahanpana, please don't do that. Give me 6 months, I'll make your horse fly. So Akbar says, you'll make my horse fly? Okay, go back to jail. So he goes back to jail and his roommate asks him, how are you going to make his horse fly? He said, 6 months, man. I would have been dead tomorrow. In 6 months, Akbar may die, horse may die, I may die, horse may fly. I mean, entrepreneurship is sort of the art of staying alive long enough to get lucky, if you think about it that way. But even thinking about entrepreneurship in those terms, I think that it's really important for entrepreneurs to think about what I'm thinking about today, which is that I have 3 distinct roles. My shareholder role is completely different from my board member role, which is completely different from my chief executive role. I think that that's really a confusion which And many traditional businesses sort of viewed those three roles as concurrent, as guaranteed, and for life. My kids will never come to work at TeamLease. They do other things. Me and Ashok had decided that up front. And, it's been liberating to sort of think about my shareholder role, which nobody can take away from me unless I choose to. Even today, we're a listed company and I'm the largest shareholder. But that's a totally different role from my board member role, which is sort of making sure I get the next quarter century right, versus my chief executive role, which I handed over to Ashok, and now Ashok will be handing over to somebody else very soon. And I think that was only possible because I decided to spend 50% of my time outside the company. It started with saying that the binding constraint on TeamLease being 1 million employees. Every year we go for a strategy offsite. We have about 400,000 employees today. But every year we ask ourselves, what stands between us and 1 million employees? And while IT systems and better brand building and more salespeople and more variable comp and all that normal stuff is the MBA crap is always comes up, but the fundamental binding constraint is regulatory cholesterol. And so I started recognizing that I wanted to make the case on a real-time basis. I've been to Delhi every week for 10 years, right? And then that's when I started working with the government, whether directly and related to labor markets, or indirectly, Central Board of Education, National Skill Mission, CAG, RBI board. I've done a bunch of this. Obviously, the biggest question I have is, how do you get something done in government after everybody who matters in government agrees with you? You've got to think about that. When you're outside, you think they disagree with you. But actually, the question is not what. The question is how. The problem with all policy reports in the last many decades has been is they focus on describing the world rather than specific, finite, and actionable sort of policy interventions, which are subject to the political economy test, right? It's not a technocratic process reform. I mean, most technocratic heavy lifting on financial sector reform or labor reform or oil sector reform or any reform, you tell me which one you want, I can give you a report 20, 25 years old, which did a wonderful job in pointing out the what, but it didn't think through the incentives of people, the civil service, nobody cuts tree they're sitting on, how do you deal with vested interests, so the Samdhan Dandbhed of Arthashastra is very much more important than your spreadsheet or your PowerPoint. But, I think it's really a great time to think about the next steps in India, right? And frankly, that's how I thought about my career, right? Eliud Kipchoge is one of my favorite marathoners. He's the only marathoner to have run a marathon in less than 2 hours. He says, you run the first half of the marathon on your legs and the second half on your mind. That's true for countries, by the way. That's what the middle income trap is, right? When you try to run it on your legs rather than shifting on your mind, it's true for careers. And I think that's really what India is sort of trying to shift right now. We're trying to shift gears from running on our legs to sort of running on our mind. And there are really only three things we need to do. We need to take more risk. We need a more adventurous state. We need more teamwork, between the private sector, non-profits and the public sector. It was just a complete waste of time to sort of, every bureaucrat, including my dad who's sitting here, looks down on behind every great fortune is a great crime. It was always sort of, because in the license Raj where they grew up, you couldn't really make money honestly. And that was because you had to manipulate the system. But you've got to think about it as all three, right? Krishna Dev Raya, was obviously a very wise king. But when you go to Hampi, or even if you go, there's almost at all places, there is a band of tigers, horses, and elephants. And, history is all myth, and myth is all history. But, I've often read, or it's often been told to me by locals, that comes from his book on government, where he says that you need horses for speed, elephants for stability, and tigers for courage. It really takes all three things for you to sort of get, you can have speed without courage, you can have balance without that. And I recognize that sort of clearly when you think about building institutions, when you think about reform, or when you think about the contempt that all three people, the private sector, non-profits, and government have for each other. I think we're not going to get to where we want to go, at least in my mind, unless we fix that. So, all this comes from a deeply personal place, right? I'm speaking to, postmortems have a certainty that prescriptions don't. Every doctor will tell you, standing where I am right now, I'm the child of civil servants. My dad was in the police, and I carry the gifts and wounds of a civil service upbringing. Thankfully, I overcame the wounds. The gifts are substantial. You realize early in life that you don't live in an economy, you live in a society. Frugality is a really wonderful gift for entrepreneurs, because if entrepreneurship is the art of staying alive long enough to get lucky, how do you get lucky? You be frugal with capital. How do you be frugal with capital is really a tone from the top in an organization. So if you think about being frugal as the gift, the wounds are obviously risk aversion, which I hopefully have managed to overcome in some ways. But even just my own experiences, I sold my first company to Hewitt, and they sentenced me to 2 years in Singapore. So I ran Asia Pacific for Hewitt, which I hated. King of a small kingdom is still king. Once you work for yourself, then 26 people on a conference call every morning, every Monday morning, when anybody can say no and nobody can say yes, is absolutely drives you crazy, right? But I'm less arrogant than I used to be, because now I'm big, and now we have 26 people in our company on a conference call on every Monday morning. So how do you balance to be a small company and think quickly on your feet? And how do you keep your metabolism fast while still having the resources of a big company? Obviously, I've never met a small company that doesn't want to be a big company. So let's not be too romantic about small companies. But how do you be fast while you're being big is really the important challenge for us and for India in my own sort of thinking. But in closing, I can obviously dive deeper, but if you have any questions. But when I landed in August 1994 for my MBA in the US, there was a front page article on the Wall Street Journal, which I remember, which said that India is more interesting than important. I hope that journalist is eating the newspaper on which he wrote that, right? What's happening in India is not once in a decade or once in a millennium. It's really once in the lifetime of a country. But, we did miss our tryst with destiny. There are 250 million people who will never read the newspaper that they deliver, or sit in the car that they clean, or send their kids to the school that they help build. But this is not a problem like cancer or climate change. It's really a plumbing problem. It's really fixing the 3 E's of education, employment, and employability. And I think we're in a unique place where, in the first 10 years of TeamLease, I probably had 5 global boards coming to India to ask me about people's supply chains and how to scale up. In the last 3 years, I've done 24 global board meetings in India. And my pickup from them is infrastructure, skills, and finance have shifted from being a dagger in the heart to a thorn in the flesh. Right? Infrastructure can be better, skills can be better, but it's not the binding constraint. In finance, obviously, it's not. The binding constraint is really regulatory cholesterol in some sense. So I think that if we get our act together on sort of rule of law, reducing regulatory cholesterol, we're obviously hitting a bunch of luck in various ways. There's a new world of work. There's a new world. More importantly, Xi Jinping is our biggest. I hope Xi Jinping doesn't get a third term. I hope he gets a lifetime, because he is our biggest ally in shifting factories out of China into India. But I think we have a new tryst with destiny that will combine mass prosperity with mass democracy. I think this is an appointment that we will keep. So it's been an honor talking with you today. Yeah, soft heart, go with your tough mind and thoughtful choices. Good luck and Godspeed. Did you want me to? We've got 5-10 minutes. Sure. So if you have any questions, happy.
Loved all your thoughts on entrepreneurship and how we could grow and all that. But have been a social entrepreneur. I always feel that when people talk to us, it's always expected that we are very humble. We are, if I have to put it right, I don't think people will be okay with us shifting to Goa and working out of Goa and asking for funds, or people would not be very okay if we get on a Mercedes and say, okay, we want fund for our organization. So how do you think social entrepreneurs can stand up for themselves and still ask for money and still tell that, okay, I deserve this kind of salary, or the organization deserves what it is? How do we not look poor and still stand up for ourselves?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I don't drive a Mercedes myself now. But are you saying that how do we get better pay in the social sector?
Yes,
Is that the essence of your question?
Yes.
Is that how do we attract more resources for human capital? Because if human capital, everybody has, it's like teaching, right? I mean, if you ask teachers to take spiritual returns for teaching kids, all of them have kids and their kids have aspirations. So we have to pay teachers better. Is that your question?
part of it, like for example, if I take myself as a social entrepreneur or someone who's starting an IT firm in Bangalore, they are 100 times more confident in asking money, or how a founder can ask money for themselves and things. But as we come from social enterprise and sector, we are always expected to be a more humble and be
But it is a different path, right? I mean, it's something my dad says all the time about when people crib in government about, we want to get paid as much as the private sector. It's a different path. You don't have the job security that you have in government. And sometimes you just don't have the impact that you have in government. Right? I think that, there's all kinds of returns that everybody gets. You get spiritual returns, you get intellectual returns, you get financial returns, you get impact returns, and everybody will value things differently, right? You're going to have to figure out your basket and your weightage of all of them. I mean, asking people to work for free is beyond the point unsustainable. But I'm ready to work for free now at this stage in my life. And, the only things I probably do now are the ones that I do for free. But that's from my, high horse after, 30 years in 2 companies. So I would submit that, the government, the social sector, and the private sector involve different bundles of rewards. I think in the past, asking people to work at the salaries that they did in government was wrong, but some of that has been corrected. I think in the social sector, you're starting to see some corrections, but I don't think it's ever going to be the same as the private sector. And something in me says that maybe it should not be. It'll not be the same, but should it be good enough for everybody to give a good life and get something? Because frankly, it's a different path, and it's a different bundle of rewards, and it's a different, what floats your boat is different. So obviously, the way we paid people in government and the social sector in the past was wrong. But in my mind, I'm not sure you're going to get paid as much as Mark Zuckerberg or whoever is getting paid a lot these days. Maybe Satya Nadella. Yes. But asking for money is a different question. I think that's a different question. I know I focused on your salary part or the compensation part, but there's no reason for you to for the social sector to not do what say Ashoka has done versus other universities, right? They've raised now 5,000 crores. They're probably going to raise another 10,000 crores because of the recognition that if you want to be among the top 100 global universities in the world, you're going to have to, raise the resources to do that. So I think you're going to see a new breed of institutions who recognize that, Voltaire used to say, God is not on the side of the biggest armies, but the best shots. But sometimes God is on the side of the biggest armies, and you've got to raise the money and do the resources.
I just have a question. When you mentioned, I've heard you say this, that the social sector, the non-profits have a scale problem.
Yeah.
Because they need to solve the scale problem. Can you double click on what?
Well, that's the difference. Why I spend so much time on the baby and the dwarf? I mean, indirectly, that's what I was trying to signal to you, that there are lots of dwarfs in the private sector too. I think the difference between baby and dwarfs in social sector is the same as the difference between baby and dwarfs in the private sector. It is not more money. It is really the balancing the next quarter and quarter century. It is balancing goals and metrics. It is balancing poetry and prose. It really is balancing money and brains. I mean, I know many unicorn startups. I met one last night whom I asked, what is your strategy? He said, raising more money than my competitor. I think that's the most stupid strategy I've ever heard, right? I'm in the camp of Field Marshal Rommel. Rommel was asked by Hitler to throw 25,000 soldiers at a problem. And he said, sweat saves blood, blood saves lives, but brain saves both. Right? So I think the difference between the scale deficit, which is there in many private sector companies too, right? It's not like every private sector company is large, is pretty similar to the government schemes that scale. and don't scale is pretty similar to the nonprofits. It's really human capital. It really is strategy, not being a. There's a difference in list of ingredients and recipe. You know, the nazakat in cooking lies in recipe, not in the list of ingredients. Everybody can get the list of ingredients. So I would submit. I mean, I've thought a lot about babies versus dwarfs in the private sector. But as I get older, I think the same things travel. You know, to government and to sort of nonprofits. It is balancing the next quarter century. It is balancing poetry and prose. It is balancing risk-taking with prudence. It is balancing cognitive diversity within the team. It is balancing resources where more cooks in the kitchen versus a different recipe. You know, when we all focus on more cooks in the kitchen, very often a new recipe is probably better than that to do. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I really loved. Okay, this is totally new perspective. Okay, and you have it in entirety. Is there any like books or something that talks about this? You know, I don't know whether you have written books.
No, I haven't. I haven't. I do a column for Indian Express, but I mean, in some sense, it's just I'm trying to synthesize my own learning, right? I mean, it's very hard to learn as an adult, right? And I think for me, this transition from being an entrepreneur in a small company to being an entrepreneur in a big company to now transitioning to being a shareholder to now spending time on sort of 4 or 5 new 5 nonprofits, one university, Ashoka, I'm on the board, one think tank, I now chair NCAER. We started something called New India Foundation. I don't know whether some of you have heard of it. We give fellowships to write books about post-1947 India. We give 18 lakhs a year to take a year off and write a book. We have 38 books published now. And 2 schools, so one higher-end school, Neev, it's very close to here. And then obviously in Kanpur, we have 12,000 kids where my parents live. So it's not a book in some sense, right? I'm just sharing you WIP of my own sort of thinking to recognize that India's sort of evolution at this point in time is a very unique crossroad. It's very hard to decide what matters more in life, luck or skill. I know lots of lucky people who are unskilled. I know lots of skilled people who are unlucky. So maybe it's more choices, right? So all I was trying to frame for you was that the choices that India will make for mass prosperity offer a number of unique opportunities for people in government and private sector and the social sector. And that's going to happen anyway.
I have a second. So this deals, okay, versus rules. Okay, I think deals gives a lot of trauma. Okay, that's what brought me actually out of my social. Okay, I had taken a plunge. Okay, so are there, unregulatory cholesterol? I think there will be 27,000 ways of getting sin and pap. Okay, similar. Okay, and that doesn't really work. Okay, so and I think that okay. Lots of people, okay, I feel will be not go. It's not just economics. It's about getting into one of these rules, okay, where you can lose everything. Okay.
I mean, I think it's a complicated question about means versus ends. Please don't. I'm not a purist. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm not trying to be right. I'm trying to be successful. I think being right is a waste of time. I am sort of disappointed that economics has become mathematics and political science has become statistics, because the core of both of them is sort of this debate about means versus ends. Do you do bad things for good things, good outcomes, and life is second best at best. I mean, it's not an algorithm, right? It's a heuristic. Most entrepreneurs, when you ask them to describe how they're thinking, it's not an algorithm. They can't write it down for you, but it is a heuristic. So this move from deals to rules beyond a point doesn't work, as we are seeing in the US today. I mean, I would say US has rule of law, but lawfare is quite a new thing you're seeing in it's the warfare of law. I mean, I don't think if Biden's son would not have been convicted for the offense he was, if he was not Biden's son, I don't think Trump would be convicted for paying off somebody if he wasn't Trump. So the law, even though it's the rule of law, it has wide open interpretation, right? I mean, so I would say that this deals to rules is a framework. I think you can use laws for lawfare too. I've seen it happen. So we have to, as you know, I think the most wise advice always is the madhyam marg, when the balance that I talked about. So rules obviously are better than deals, but beyond the point, rules will also become manipulatable. So then you'll get into ethics, then you'll get into means and ends. Okay.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I would request all other questions to be, over coffee conversations. I would like to request our alum Rashmi to come and thank Manish for his time and the exciting lecture. Rashmi.
Thank you for your wonderful talk. I hope to take back the ideas and the wisdom of being balanced running on my mind. I'm a corporate person who attended the ILSS's leadership session last January and been wanting to make the move to the social sector. Pretty much, I'm on personal leave of absence from my corporate job and on my way there. So I hope everything that you've said will help me make the transition and will help all of us. Certainly sure that will help all of us here. Thank you so much for your very enlightening. Please, may I give you a small token? Thank you.
Thank you, Rashmi. Thank you, Manish. We move on to our next talk, the keynote address by Ram, and I'll quickly introduce Ram. Again, needs no introduction. Ram is a co-founder and managing director of Rangde, a pioneering social investment platform he established in 2008 to enable affordable credit for underserved communities. A staunch advocate of the social business model, Ram's innovative efforts in driving financial inclusion earned him the prestigious Ashoka Fellowship in 2012. Would request Ram to speak for about 15-20 minutes and then a conversation, and we'll break for coffee at 10:30. Over to you, Ram, please. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you can speak for about 20-25, half an hour, and then this is all. Yeah, sorry. Please.
I get the microphone.
You are okay? Sure.
Thank you so much for having me here. So I know many of you want to transition, and I did that many, many years ago. So would you want to hear the entire story, or would you want me to just focus on the Rangde bit?
Your transition also.
The transition was good? Okay. So I'll go back a bit in time because, all of us, when we want to get into the social sector, there has to be that why, right? Why, and for us, we discovered this at different points in time. For me, it happened when I was doing my engineering. I studied in this college called Siddhartha Engineering College in Vijayawada. By the way, it's the same college where Ram Gopal Verma studied. Right? So you probably know now why he makes the kind of films he makes. So this the college had a bit of a history. Right? It was known for its campus violence. In fact, the first film which he made was on a college campus. It's called Shiva. I'm not sure if you're old enough, you'll remember that movie. And it had a different impact on me because when I survived the first year and got into the second year, wanted to do something. Somebody came up with this idea that we should do a fun fair, a fun fair in the campus amongst all this violence. And we said, yeah, sure. And I volunteered to be part of this, and one thing led to the other, and we ended up doing a fundraiser for an orphanage, which was run by Missionaries of Charity. And as a run-up to this fundraiser, we made a small design change in the event. And the change was to also celebrate the birthdays of the children who were living in this orphanage as part of this fundraiser in our campus. And that small design change changed everything overnight. We had the biggest birthday bash Vijayawada had ever seen. But overnight, we also experienced peace. I still remember the day before the event, the group which was known for its violence, they sent a message out that they wanted to meet me at the fag end of the campus. And they asked me to come alone. So I took a friend from my hostel to basically take care of me once they were done. And there was just 4 tall guys, and one of them raised the hand and gently patted me on my back, and he said, we've been hearing really good things about what you've been doing. Tomorrow is a very big day. Sometimes, our own group members may not, listen to us. So if they create a problem, do let us know. We'll take swift action. The event itself was fantastic, and it had a very profound impact on me, because everyone who was finding a reason to create a problem was now finding ways of working together, and this was across the campus, right? It was just that one event, and what I took away from that was that all of us have empathy in us. We may live an entire life not expressing it because we never found an opportunity to express it. And this fundraiser became a universal expression of empathy for the entire campus. And please remember, this was many, many years ago, right? So I still remember when I officially bunked college and I entered my class back, I received a standing ovation. So something magical was happening. And they were some way connecting the dots and saying that this guy was responsible for it. So, and that is when, that was the first inflection point where I decided that I would get into the social space sooner than later, but at a time when, I can financially sustain it. So completed my engineering, came to Bangalore, started working for NIIT, and that is when I met Smita, who's our co-founder of Rangde. And both of us had a similar, passion for what we wanted to do with our lives. And we eventually got married and we moved to the UK. We started living in this really tiny village called Kidlington, 4 miles away from Oxford. And after about a few months of living there, for the first time, we began to understand what somebody meant in India when they said India is a developing country. Because for the first time, we were experiencing what a developed state looks and feels like. And that is when we asked ourselves a simple question: how many years would it take for India to get there? Right? And we said, let's keep it simple. We didn't want to compare the GDP numbers, the per capita incomes and all that. We said, okay, if you were to take a random village in India and maybe of equal size as Kidlington, and compare the standards of living and see how much time would it take for India to get there. We struggled with the answer. We said, would it take a decade, a few decades, or would it take a lifetime? And that is when we made a promise to ourselves. We said, well, 2 years it is. We will move back to India and start something in the social space. What that something would be did not really bother us, because when you come from a country like India, you're spoiled for choice. So we said 2006. By the way, the year was 2006. So that was the kind of the milestone we had set for ourselves. And things started magically happening. Once we did this, a few weeks down the line, Smita used to, by the way, volunteer for Oxfam in Oxford. And I ended up getting a dream job offer with Vignette. It was an enterprise content management company. BBC, all these media sites are powered by the technology. And 2 years just flew, really quickly. And both of us were at our peak of our careers, right? And in those 2 years, we also got to travel the world, because I was part of the European EMEA headquarters of Vignette in Europe. So traveled extensively in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And the more we traveled, the more we realized that all these countries are where they are because people in those countries chose a different future for that country. Right? So, you can't get, people from outside to come and solve India's problems. So, but even though it was very tempting for us to come back a bit earlier, but then we said 2006 it is. And when 2006 came, uh, one thought was that, we'd drop everything and move back to India and start something. But then we also thought that, well, when you come back to India, then, there are a lot of people who are asking you, what are you doing with your life? Right? Regardless of what they are doing with their lives. So, so we thought, let's avoid that if we can, as much as possible. So we thought, let's zero down on an idea, incubate the idea while we're in Oxford, and once we get funded, we'll move back to India. So we looked at several ideas. One was, we looked at child labor. How can we make that more holistic? Then we looked at how do we create rural doorstep employment. The other idea we looked at was how do we bridge the massive empathy gap which we have in the country using media, new age media. And then finally, we stumbled across microcredit because the announcement was just made that Mohammed Yunus and the Grameen Bank have jointly won the Nobel Peace Prize. Our initial response was, well, Bangladesh is a poor country. India is far ahead. We don't need microcredit in India. But when we Googled it a bit, we noticed that India was actually behind Bangladesh. Back then, only 7.7% of India's eligible population had access to credit from a formal source. And we also stumbled across an article which spoke about how borrowers in Andhra Pradesh, close to Hyderabad, how some of them had borrowed and how some of them had committed suicide. By the way, this article was published in 2004, and we're reading this in 2006. The article went on to talk about how the district collector of Hyderabad passed an order saying that all the borrowers who have borrowed from the microfinance institutions need not pay them back. So there was a big hue and cry. Thought leaders like Vijay Maharaj and others came running to the district collector and said, sir, please take your order back. Otherwise, we'll have to shut shop. The district collector said, I understand what Mohammed Yunus is doing in Bangladesh, but this is not what you're doing in India. You're charging interest rates which are very high, 40% plus. This will not take anyone out of poverty. So despite the order not being taken back, the communities went ahead and repaid the loans because they were worried that they may not get further credit if they don't repay. So the crisis got resolved, and nothing much happened between 2004 and 2006. And we noticed that the interest rates continued to be very high. And we felt this is perhaps a worthy cause to focus on. And we also read this beautiful book of Mohammed Yunus called Creating a World Without Poverty, where he talks about that if credit is designed and delivered in a sustainable manner, it can actually help people overcome poverty. And we felt that most of the issues which you find in India, be it healthcare, education, most of these, right? They're all somewhere manifestations of poverty. And we felt that if you could address the root, then some of the other things would get resolved. And we also read this very interesting media report, which spoke about how the media questioned the Nobel Committee as to why they chose to give a peace prize to Professor Yunus instead of a Nobel in economics. Right? Because as you all know, right, the peace is considered it's the highest Nobel. So usually the Nobel Committee ignores such, questions, but in this particular case, they chose to respond. And the response was that in the history of this world, there is enough evidence to suggest that wherever there is no poverty, there is peace. And because Professor Yunus was overcoming poverty in Bangladesh, they felt it was the right candidate for the Peace Prize. And that had a kind of a profound impact on our thinking as well. And we said, yeah, this is the way to go. And again, 2006 was a very interesting year for multiple reasons. It's also the year when peer-to-peer platforms were just taking off. Zopa was making headline news in the UK. Kiva was they had the Oprah Winfrey moment, the servers crashed.
And we felt that perhaps this is a great alternative to microfinance. Because not only would it create a beautiful alternative to traditional credit, but it would also help bridge the massive empathy gap which we have in our country. Because unlike charity or investments, market investments, here you're actually lending money. While you lend money, you also receive repayments. You'll receive that money back. So we felt that initially people may not notice that, but at some point when they notice that there's this person who's working really hard, it could be a farmer, could be an entrepreneur, could be an artisan, and repaying the loan back, and if they do choose to go and visit them, spend a day or two with them, and something magical may come out of it, right? So we decided to focus on a peer-to-peer construct for credit. And then we qualified each other as co-founders because Smita comes from a social work background and I come from a tech consulting background. I'm not a geek, by the way. I used to consult. And then the next step was to raise capital. And I'm sure most of us, will go through that or have gone through that. But we felt to be fair to the investor or the foundation who's going to fund us, it's only fair that we build a small prototype and then showcase it to them and see if it makes sense. And so we decided to fund that prototype ourselves. So we took £6,000 from our savings. It was a big amount back then, even bigger now. But we decided to, but we made one promise. We said, if it has to work, it has to work within the £6,000. Not a penny more, not a penny less. And if it doesn't work, happy to call it off. So we started, getting up at 4 o'clock local time, because that's the time when India comes to work. And we decided to, we're essentially looking for two sets of partners, a design partner and a technology partner, to help us build the prototype. And, we did this, like for 3 months, apart from losing some sleep. We made absolutely no progress because there are a lot of these dead ends, right? People said, oh, we'll charge you this much and we didn't have the money, or they were not qualified. And we said, oh, this is not going to work. And just then, when we were about to give up, we thought this was a sign from the universe, right? So in that, it's not your cup of tea. We got connected to a bunch of, we got connected to a person called Sharath Hegde. And I didn't know who he was back then. And he agreed to get on a call, a Skype call, audio call, and hear us out. So I didn't realize who he was. He was, in fact, the first employee of Infosys. Narayan Murthy talks about him in his book. In the first chapter, he says, Sharath Hegde had this rare distinction of getting interviewed by all the 7 co-founders and surviving it. So he got on a call, in a 2-hour call, and in the end he said, I get this, and I will connect you with a bunch of techies who will help this platform for you. And it sounded too good to be true, and he said, give me 24 hours. And as promised, in the very next day, he connected me with a bunch of techies who had spent 15 years with Infosys and who were also part of the core team which built Finacle, Infosys award-winning core banking solution. And this is what happens to perception, right? So they used to look up to Sharath as a role model. And here was Sharath who was connecting us to NRIs who were based in Oxford, right? So they assumed that we were multimillionaires based in Oxford planning a comeback. And I still remember the first call. It was very hilarious because they were giving us a lot of, you realize, right? Somebody's giving a lot of respect. Yeah. So, and I was feeling very awkward. So I had to, interject and say that, really sorry. I just want to give you a disclaimer. They said, go ahead. I said, well, we're actually very poor in our eyes, based in Oxford, and planning to do something good for the country. And they thought, and this is the Infosys thing, right? So they thought this is the humility, right? They thought they were being so humble. They said, no, even if what you're saying is true, we would like to continue the way we've been talking. So we said, please continue then. And then it obviously showed, right? Because they sent us a proposal for the prototype, and the proposal was 33,000 pounds. And I called them up instantly, and yeah, and they said, and I apologized to them, saying that, and they said, and then they believed that, I was really serious. They said, I apologized and I said sorry, and I was about to hang up the phone, and that's when they said, so, no, don't hang up. 2 questions. Will you pay us at all? I said, yes, of course. And then he said, how much? I was about to tell him, he said, don't tell me now, think about it and let me know. But please make sure you don't remove 0 from it. I said, sure. And then a day later, Smita and I, we wrote a very patriotic and a passionate email saying that, this is really about India. This is really about testing an idea. And if they truly believe in it, they should back us. And I also, I said, I've not removed a 0. I've removed a number. All we can afford to pay you is 3,000 pounds. And there's absolutely, and they got back really instantly. They said, we'll get back to you. So you know what happens when they say they'll get back? They never get back to you, right? So a day passed, 2 days, 3 days, 1 week, and we had given up. And the following, the first working day of the following week, we just got 1 email saying that we accept your terms, please find the project plan attached. And the first slide on that plan was transfer the 3,000 pounds now. So, but they're not shared the bank account details. So, how do you transfer? So I called them up. It was quite late in the evening. And they said, you call us for that? I said, yeah. So I can transfer the money. They said, no, we've not opened the bank account yet. But it's good you called. So that's really got us, that was a huge shot in the arm. And that really, I'm sure some of us would recognize these, right? Moments when you look for those signs. And for us, that was a very big sign that we were going in the right direction. And then we did a roadshow in Delhi in 2007. There was a peak of the microfinance in India. We were the only ones who had a counter narrative, because the popular narrative back then was the interest rates the communities pay doesn't matter. 40%, 60% doesn't matter, because typically a poor woman buys a goat. Typically the goat gives birth to 5 kids. So the ROI is 500%. Right? So, and our point of view was that, well, it matters because every woman in a group or in a community is unique. They have a different risk appetite, different background, and we can't really cookie cutter credit. And yeah, so one thing led to the other, and we got funding just after that from ICICI Foundation. Dr. Nachiket, I'm not sure if you know him, but he heard us out. And again, these are things which, you dream of, right? All we did was to reach out to Dr. Nachiket more for legal advice. And he said, yeah, sure, I'll advise you. And when he said, why don't you come and meet me in India, wherever you are in India? We said, yeah, sure. And we met him. He heard our story and he said, what's stopping you from coming back to India? We said, so funding, because only when we get funding, we'll move back to India. And he said, okay, I'll fund you. And it just like that, right? So we got a record funding of close to $500,000, all in grant, at the peak of the global meltdown. And that is when our families also started believing us. So yeah, and then a few years down the line, Mr. Ratan Tata heard about us, and he was very kind and generous. He agreed to fund us as well. So in 2008 to 2017, we ran around as a non-profit. And 2017, RBI came out with new guidelines for peer-to-peer lending. We took a sabbatical, unheard of, completely unheard of, a sabbatical which was funded by the Tata Trust. Very grateful to them. They said, we've committed to you. Are you going to be a non-profit in the sabbatical? We said, yes, sir. So continue, continue being a non-profit. And then we were able to transition into a for-profit. And I just want to, talk a little bit about, I don't know how we are doing on time, but, very often as a social entrepreneur, I think it's very important to discover the why and let it, give yourself the time, right? Please don't be in a rush. And once you discover the why, I think you should fiercely guard it, right? Because they will come not once, but many, many times, right? There will be many times when you would be tested, right? And then if you buckle, then what are you standing for? And that is what people connect with, right? So we've had many such instances where we were willing to walk away. So this regulation, when it came, it was just one of those moments when we decided that we will not take commercial capital to set up because to get a license from RBI, you need to be a for-profit. You cannot apply as a non-profit. So we decided to call it a day. We decided to hang up our boots and say that, well, we've done whatever we could. With two reasons. One, that we're struggling with the whole idea of a business model, right? How do we have a business model which does not exploit the communities, we want to create value for? The second challenge was, how do we get social equity capital? There's nothing like that exists, right? There is something called impact investing, but then again, the terms are very commercial. So we decided to call it off, and we reached out to a mentor who's been a mentor for me and Smita for many years. He heard us out and he said, great, you want to, give up, do that. But don't give up without trying. So give yourselves 3 months and see if you can make this work without compromising on your first principles. We said, sure, we'll be happy to. And we said, yeah, 3 months is not a big amount. It's not a long time. And we went back to the drawing board. We did a lot of design sprints. We invited a lot of people. His name is Professor Sudarshan. He himself was there in one of those sprints. And while this was happening, Smita wrote an email. We had 15,000 social investors, lenders on the platform. Absolutely zero marketing. And we've painstakingly built this beautiful community of social investors over 9 years. So she sent out an email saying that we are at the crossroads. We might not go forward. And these are the two problems. They said, we don't know about the business model, but when it comes to the equity, we might be able to help you. We said, we'll be happy to invest in the company. And we asked them on what terms. They said, well, you define the terms, we'll give you the money. To our surprise, you need 2 crores to apply for the license. So we raised 2 crores in less than a month from 23 individuals without a term sheet. And while that was happening, we were looking at this business model, and to our surprise, we found a whole new business model, which ensured that the communities would not end up paying high interest rates. And the idea was simple. The idea was to repurpose Rangde from being a lender to being a platform which is providing a service. So the idea was to charge for access and not for usage. We ran through the numbers and it looked fantastic from a sustainability point of view. We filed for we had to rebuild the tech stack and everything. We did all of that and applied for the license. And we relaunched Rangde in September 2019. And again, I'm sure all of us are survivors of that phase. September 19 was when the pandemic was round the corner, and we went straight into the pandemic. We were just about to give our uh, first batch of loans, and the Prime Minister made the announcement that we are going into a lockdown, and we were wondering what to do, because what would we do during this time? And just then we got this distress call from a group of farmers in Yavatmal. The soybean prices had crashed because of the announcement, and they wanted warehouse financing. They said, we have soybean, we'll put in a warehouse, can you finance it? We said, sure. And overnight we raised about 1 million rupees and we gave it to them. And that one small intervention, those days there were a lot of WhatsApp groups, right? So the word spread very quickly saying that Rangdi is actually giving loans to farmers. And we were like, no, hang on. That was just one loan, right? So many people started reaching out to us. And we were wondering, how do we get the word out? I mean, how do we raise capital, right? We had some commitments, but not to the tune of how many people are reaching out to us. And that is when we reached out to NDTV. And thanks to Dr. Prannoy Roy, he just loved the idea. He said, let's do a telethon together. And this was a campaign to support small and marginal farmers. And to our surprise, in 2 hours of live telethon, we raised 5.5 crores of interest-free capital. And NDTV went on record to say that this was the best telethon in NDTV's history, which they've ever done for a social platform. So, and because of the repeat telecast they did, the amount bubbled up to 10 crores. We were able to serve 8,400 farmers in the peak of the pandemic without stepping out from our homes. In remote areas like Koraput and really, really tough geographies. So that's the that's the story so far. So I know that we can also open it up for Q&A and make it more interactive. And I just want to also just very quickly share some more key data points. Even till today, we are entirely funded by individuals. We have a record number of angels on our cap table. There are more than 200 angel investors on our cap table. And people ask us, how do you manage 200 angels? But we look at them as a large group of friends and family who passionately believe in what we do. Also, I'm not sure if you've been tracking peer-to-peer lending in the last year or so. It's been in the news quite a bit in the last couple of years, especially last year. So again, this is something which I just want to call it out, right? See, entrepreneurship is hard, right? And it can be in health hazard as well. But social entrepreneurship is even harder, right? Because you are really, you're trying to go against this, you're questioning the status quo, you're going against the tide. So what had happened was, in the peer-to-peer lending space, there were a lot of platforms which had got the license from RBI and they were blatantly violating the regulations. So last year, RBI had to crack down, and they did a massive crackdown. And ironically, today, Rangdi happens to be the only regulated P2P platform which is still operational. Right? And honestly, it comes down to the why. Right? Again, I'm just going back to highlight the why. Because if you stay true to your purpose, the purpose will take care of you. Right? It's very, very important. And I think, and we've seen this happen again and again, time and again. And And when all this media coverage was happening, right, P2P was getting all the negative media coverage. Guess what was happening with our equity investors? They were saying that, no, we will double down our investment in Rangde. Right? So, so we've had such, again, not because, we made some tall presentations, business plan presentations, but because they were able to empathize with the purpose. And the way they could get to that purpose was through us. And therefore they said, you have our support. Money is just incidental. Right. So I will stop now, but I'm very happy to take any questions and
Yeah.
Thanks, Ram, for that inspiring story of entrepreneurship, of course. One important question that comes up specifically in a P2P lending domain,
Yeah.
and I'm not talking when you're a big name today as Rangde, right? I'm going back to the early days where the trust to fund in you as an individual, right? I can understand angels and PEs and all because they do the due diligence and they're smarter, right, in understanding the entire thing. But how did you really build that trust, right? There's normally a trust deficit in normal individuals building, right? I know the COVID time was a little different because you're tugging at the emotional strings, right? And when you're in trouble, you feel like giving away a little bit of it. But in normal times, I think, how did you break that cycle? I'm sure you did something, right? And to break that
I
cycle.
think we have not
Yeah.
done that yet. But I'll tell you what the issue is, right? And I think Manish also spoke about it quite eloquently. I think we have a massive issue in India. I don't think it's a trust deficit issue. I think it's the empathy deficit. Massive, to a massive extent. For many of us, many of India's problems are not even visible. Right? And it's interesting, right? If it is made visible to you in a right context, then you will take action. Right? Because we become immune. Because we've just grown up, we've lived here, we won't be able to sleep at night if we take all India's problems to bed. I mean, it's impossible. We won't be able to live in India, right? So what we have been able to do, I think it's entirely word of mouth, to be very honest. We've grown really, really, really slowly. And you're absolutely right. वो समय अलग था. जज्बा अलग था, उसमें कुछ और ही बात है, right? Everybody was sitting at home. They had no better thing to do apart from watching NDTV at that time. But since then, Smita and I have been trying to figure out, is there a way to recreate that magic at scale using media? Honestly, we've been trying really, really hard. We've reached out to a lot of people in India and around the world to see who could help us find, a way to do this. Fortunately, last year, we had a breakthrough. We connected with somebody who's based in New York. She shuttles between Mumbai and New York. Also somebody who's part of the core team which ran Satyamev Jayate. And she, very generously agreed to join forces with us. So what we are planning to do, hopefully this year, we will be launching a YouTube reality series in partnership with YouTube, which will celebrate rural entrepreneurship like never before. Because today, when somebody sees a farmer, an entrepreneur, we write them off. They're not investment grade at all. I mean, I'm charity kar raha hu. This person will repay? I don't think so. I still remember, during the NDTV campaign, Nitin Kamath of Jiroda, was a good friend. He came online and he said, "Look, I'm going to commit." And he said initially 25 lakhs, and then he became, he was watching the programming live, and he said, "Okay, let's bump it up to 50 lakhs." And great, so he invested 50 lakhs. And a year later, he frantically calls me and says, "Ram, kuch urgently baat karna hai." I said, "What happened?" He said, the money which I gave last year has all come back." How did that happen? So I've called my team. I'm going to have an emergency call. Can you, would you mind joining? I said, "Sure, let's join." So I said, "Nitin, I'm going to just repeat what I said then. Now, that was a loan." But he said, "No, but how can they repay the loans?" Right? So we need to change that construct, right? That it's a huge problem, right? And the irony is that the microfinance institutions are making money off them, right? I mean, look at last year, what happened. Reserve Bank of India went after, kept issuing notifications after notifications, "Don't test our patience." Right? So what had happened in 2004, sadly happened, what happened in just Hyderabad, in that area, sadly happened all over the country last year. Right? Interest rates of 30%, processing fee of 7.5%. I mean, APR of 75%, 80%. So, what are we talking about, right? So that's the, I think.
Started in the SKS fiasco period, right? 2000.
Before that. Before that, yeah. Because we actually saw that fiasco happen and right in front of our eyes. And yeah.
We've got one more hand up there first. But one thing, Ram, it will be very interesting for us to understand from you is Rangde's investment approach. Just lead up to from your previous point. What are the parameters that you look for when you are convinced that you want to invest in a social enterprise?
Sorry,
what is your investment approach?
Investment approach?
Yeah. What kind of parameters do you look for?
So we don't invest. Okay. We curate.
Yeah.
We curate opportunities so that you can invest. Right? So does that answer your question?
What's the interest rate you charge?
So we charge 8% simple interest.
Annual.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is okay. No, so as someone who has lost like 15 lakh rupees, lending, to friends in this, I feel I should have known about this, because all of it never came back. Okay, I know when I give out money to someone, I know the money is not going to come back. Okay, and you will lose a friendship. Okay, that's how I have felt. Okay, so and it's interest free also, it doesn't come back.
Okay. In what?
I'm saying I have lent money to people. Okay, and I know when I'm lending, when not interest नहीं चाहिए, वापस दे देना, 6 साल के बाद वापस नहीं आया, and you lose a friendship. So I feel this model, where you can curate people in real need, that's a wonderful thing.
तो उसकी वजह भी ये है कि वो, because you should never mix, friendship with money, right? And the other thing is, नहीं वो नहीं काम करते. हमने भी experiment किया था, where we asked our social investors to refer their domestic workers, the domestic staff, and fund them through the platform. They never got their money back. The reason for that is, it's pure behavioral science, right? The reason for that is they look up to you, saying that you would not mind if I don't repay. Exactly. No, absolutely. That's so. It's very standard. Yeah, it's a psychological thing.
I have got two quick questions.
Yeah.
We are also working with communities at the ground level, migrants and vulnerable populations. And the biggest challenge, as you had pointed out, is they find it very difficult to establish the credibility. Like, these people will take money, they will never return. They will either run away or they will use it for drinking and stuff like that. That is the mindset that whenever people have. So two things I wanted to ask you. The first thing is, while you have built the trust from the investors, how do you prioritize who gets the money? I mean, there might be 100 people who will be requesting a loan. So how do you prioritize? How do you finalize who gets the money?
All of them get it. It's just that, we plan it well.
Yeah.
Is all I can say, right? Because all of them will not need it at the same time.
Okay.
So there are continuous cycles where, fundraising cycles keep happening. So there are two things. Let me just quickly tell you how we actually curate. So that kind of will give you more clarity. So we work with organizations, it could be government programs, for-profit social enterprises, who are committed to creating or sustaining livelihoods for the communities they work with. Right? So that's a very big, check which we look for, or a signal we look for. And then we also then assess the organization, its track record, ethical fiber, leadership, and then the livelihood program which the community is part of. Right? We assess the program itself, and then we assess the individual. Right? And that is where I think we are unique, in our underwriting process. So we underwrite at 3 levels: organization, the program, and the individual. Even if the person doesn't have a credit score, or the person had a poor score because of the pandemic, right? Because everybody took gold loans or whatever, they still can borrow from Rangde, right? Because there are a lot of these other layers of underwriting which support the person who's borrowing.
We also form SHGs
Yeah.
of domestic workers,
Yeah.
helping them to get skills and get. But there are again a lot of procedures. When you go through NULM or the State Rural Livelihood Mission, there's a lot of process for them to access any loan. So will you also be supporting SHGs or individual members of SHGs?
We do.
Yeah.
But I also want to share a very positive, super positive update from the last year. So in the 3rd week of December, I received an invite from the World Bank to come to attend a round table. It was an invite only, a very special round table. And it was for me a surreal moment, because what I saw there was all the thought leaders in the sector, thought leaders who were at one point supporting microfinance institutions, coming together now and saying that we need to now find an alternative to microfinance. And that alternative is the beautiful structure we have, the cluster level federation, the village organization, and the self-help groups, right, in the SRLMs. So very, very initial days, but we are exploring how Rangde can become a part of that entire ecosystem at scale, right? So I won't go into details of it, but this is very exciting, and looking forward to that.
I think you answered some part of my question. So my question was, when it comes to rural entrepreneurship, there are already some other challenges like access to market, right? Because when you get into the rural communities, the market is not that spread as what you see in the urban side. The skill is another challenge, because the kind of skill the person may hold is not applicable to that ecosystem, and again that leads to migration. So do you consider these aspects also in your loan disbursement? I know you answered some part of the question.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yes. The answer is yes. Because we work with partners who are paranoid about exactly what you mentioned, right? So in fact, many of the entrepreneurs we fund, they sell on Amazon, right? So our partners are the real heroes, if you will, right? And this could be government bodies as well. So we work with multiple governments. So that is where the evaluation comes in, because we just hyper focus on just one thing: can we give them affordable credit with agency, which is the ability to choose, right? How much, when, how long, and all of that. That's it. That's what we are hyper focused on.
So everyone is talking about repaying. So what has your repayment percentage has been so far?
we by the way publish it on live on a homepage every 5 minutes. It gets updated. So it's about 0.4% is the default complete write-off. It's about 2.8 crores, which is still yet to come. Out of, I think we've done about 87 crores now. Out of that, it's about close to 3 crores. Again, these were very intentional bets which we took. By the way, the people who have not been able to pay are those very large foundations like Mission Samriddhi in Chennai, Deshpande Foundation in Hubli. These are very experimental, innovative kind of things, and the money would come back. So if you discount all of that, even we may still have about 1 crore, right? So out of 85 crores. So I think that, yeah, again, for us, that's not an indicator of success. I think for us, the indicator of success is, have we been able to move the needle for the communities, right? Because please remember, if you invest on the platform, right, the returns or the principal is not assured. Because at the end of the day, they are collateral-free loans, right? They're not guaranteed by anything. So our underwriting, the selection of the right partner, ensuring we support them, becomes crucial.
Hi. So I did see that you guys also raise from NRIs, and so I mean, there's a huge possibility there, right? So how can we spread more awareness to tap into that? I think that was one question, and the second is, you also said you support these organizations to ensure repayment, right? So what are the ways you enable them or support them to do that?
Yeah, essentially, we have a tech stack, we train them, but more importantly, we also prepare them to run a credit program, right? Because they may not be used to running a credit program. Please remember, Rangde's credit program is unique in the sense we are not lending our own money. We're connecting them with individuals, who are well-meaning and who want to support the entrepreneur. So we walk them through the whole thing, and we've also built an award-winning financial literacy program called Swabhiman. We had to retire it during the pandemic. We're relaunching it in a very big way now. So we give them all the other. We have a dedicated team called the Impact Partner Success Team, which works very closely, and their mandate is only one: is to make sure the entrepreneurs succeed. I think there's somebody at the back. Yeah.
Hi, Ram. My name is Anju, and I come from a communications background. I've been following you and your wife, Smita, on LinkedIn, and I see most of your stories are very authentic. You write from your experiences. And as a firm, Rangde, how much has it concentrated on marketing or, taking a certain positioning while keeping your, what did you say, the purpose at the core of it all?
Yeah, okay, I'm not sure if you've tracked this long enough, but we started writing only 2 years ago. We used to shy away from writing because we used to feel that this is not about us. This is about Rangde and we should not write. A good, kind soul.
Is it Leslie?
Huh?
Is it Leslie from your team?
No. Somebody else, who's an entrepreneur in Bangalore.
Okay.
He met us over coffee, heard us out, and a week later he said, I want to meet you for coffee again. Because turns out that when he was growing up, his mom took loans. And he narrated Rangde's story, and he said, so he said he has a gift for us both. And the gift was to really force us to write on LinkedIn at gunpoint. And I think we're grateful to him for letting us write, because otherwise we had this huge problem of saying that log kya kahenge, right? Log kya sochenge, right? So the funny thing is that all these stories which we're sharing on LinkedIn is how we actually talk to anyone we meet. So instead of talking to one person at a time, we now talk to 100,000 people at one go. So yeah, and fortunately for us, and we're deeply grateful for this, people are finding, they're able to relate with this post, right? There is a resonance. The most recent one on H-1B visa, oh my God, I mean, you should see, I think Mr. Manish would be very happy to see that or sad to see that, because that's the real problem, right? We're talking about corruption, we're talking about taxation, we're talking about, imagine Gandhi ji coming back to India in 1915 and saying that, where are my, tax breaks and also it just beats you, right? I think as a nation, we need to realize that we need to pay it forward. If a bulk of our population chooses to pass it forward, we have a problem. Right? We can't say that, okay, we'll pass this on to the next generation now. It could be wealth, it could be the privilege or the opportunity to change. Right? So that's very important.
Do you have any other questions, discussion points,
Yeah.
clarifications? Yes.
Hello, I'm Kavita, and thank you for really sharing your very inspiring story. So one question that I had is in running a social enterprise, what is the biggest challenge that you face out of the many challenges that you would have overcome in these years?
Sure. I think that's a great question. So I'll just share one challenge and I also share how we solved it. I think Manish also referred to it. I think Manish referred to the team, that you should have complementary skills. That's fantastic. But then how do you build a team? How do you build a team? It's tough. It's super tough, because if all you have to share with them is passion, right? How do you build a team, right? So honestly, I'll be very honest here. We struggled. We made record number of hiring mistakes. A time came, but it maxed out, right? There's a limit, right? You could make mistakes too, right? So there came a time when we had reached the zenith of, and that day, both Smita and I were out of the office because we could not relate with the team which was inside the office. Right? Because I couldn't find Smita inside the office, and I called her and I said, "Where are you?" She said, "She's already out." Right? So, and I think we painstakingly, and the power of mentorship, coaching, and I think is very important. So we never thought this was an issue, right? We never thought hiring, come on, how can hiring be an issue? Right? Anybody can hire. And then we reached out to a mentor with a very specific ask. Can you help us solve this problem? He said, even I'm not good at this, so let me ask my mentor. And he was like a very, very senior person. He's built large organizations. And the call lasted only for 5 minutes. He said, "Beta, हमारे ज़माने में हम वो एक टेस्ट देते थे. आप कुछ देते हैं?" तुम लोग सर टेस्ट, हाँ हम लोग एक टेस्ट देते थे, एप्टीट्यूड टेस्ट देते थे. आप कुछ देते हैं? कि नो सर. कुछ कर दे दो, टेस्ट दे दो, ठीक हो जाएगा. So we said, "Yeah, that sounds great." So then started figuring out, tests, right? Aptitude tests, all kinds of tests. And we just struggled, and we said, in India, and there's just a bunch of these, and they're horrible, right? So that's just tests you yourself will not take, right? We said, this won't cut it, right? We can't give a CAT or some, management aptitude, some ridiculous mumbo jumbo, right? And when we really, really searched it further and further and further, we looked at around the world, and there were firms in Europe, for example, They say, oh, you're from India, you can't afford it. This is very expensive. You said, you don't know how much we can afford, right? So, because the price you pay, oh, it's insane, right? Whether you're non-profit for, oh, you just don't realize. So we said, no, we have no budget caps for this, right? Because the alternative. So finally, we also, we zeroed down firm in California. So started by a bunch of mad behavioral scientists. They said, we've figured out a way you can assess someone. It doesn't matter where the person is. Because the European firm said, this is only for Europeans, not for Indians. That's the other thing which they said. So it won't work for you. But these guys said, this will work for anyone on this planet, provided they can take this assessment. It was nothing but a bunch of tests put together to measure someone's cognitive aptitude, emotional intelligence, and their personality. So we started implementing it, and I think we are pretty proud of where we are today. And so that was the biggest lesson we learned the hard way. And I'll be happy to share the tool. It's very expensive, but definitely more expensive. But I keep negotiating with them every year. But so that tool we administer to everyone.
What's it called?
It's called Criteria Corp. CriteriaCorp.com. They're based. So they have a tool.
How expensive is it?
It's off the charts. It's very expensive. It's very expensive, but we still feel I think it's still worth it. Huh? It's online. So what it allowed us to do, also this tool really helped us to build a great remote team as well. Rangde is entirely remote now. We have team members in 20 cities, towns, villages, and 2 countries. India and Argentina.
But who does the assessment?
The candidate, the person who applies for the job, they take the assessment.
No, that's okay. But who assesses the result?
Oh, it's automated.
Okay, so but even if you get the automated result,
Oh, then we do it.
so you have some parameters.
Yes.
What you're indexing on more.
No, so the report is self-explanatory. It gives you beautifully. You want to ignore it and go ahead and do it, go ahead. That you know what will happen. Right? So, because very often what happens is you also get a lot of referrals saying, you know what, this is my best friend's friend. Kuch puchna nahi hai, bas, right? So, or you got enamored by some big brands saying, okay, you know what, so crazy, So that is really, so just to answer your question.
This actually makes me curious to know what is the return on investment after making such a huge investment for this tool?
No, it's not that huge also.
Okay.
I think I'll tell you one return you'll get.
Must be you don't have the kind of attrition you were having.
Absolutely, zero attrition.
And
Peace of mind.
Yes.
How much are you willing to pay for it? Right? Peace of mind.
Okay.
By the way, we've tested this tool inside out, right? We've tested this across campuses, across the big 5 consulting firms, across military veterans, army veterans, across the board, right? And it's quite telling. The tool is dead accurate, right? It just gets you. For example, an army veteran. How would you imagine they would score on emotional intelligence? Any guesses? Not really good, right? Because they were to show empathy, they will get, right, even the line of fire. So tough, right? But if you no, absolutely, right? But for it depends on what you need, right?
If he has the empathy and operation is guaranteed.
No, but again, see, there is a scale for emotional intelligence. एक scale होता है. It's not binary. So you need to look at a scale. आप सोचो अगर किसी को आपने ले लिया जिनका इमोशनल इंटेलिजेंस कम है, आप जितना समझाना है समझा दो, उनको नहीं समझ में आएगा, आपका ब्लड प्रेशर बढ़ जाएगा, of something, right? So that is what I'm saying. I think the biggest return you will get is peace of mind.
Last question by me, yeah. So, Ram, I mean, clearly from your journey, it looks like you had a lot of very good mentors and people that have shown up at strategic times in your life. So, in hindsight, because you can, hindsight is 2020, what would you say really was some of the things that could be, because it tells me that you also sought. A lot of people may not think to seek, right? So, what would be some of the, if you had to say one or two things that were the secret sauce for the journey of Rang De?
Yeah, I think, we've also had instances where we had bad mentors, right? So you need to be aware. The thing about mentorship is you can't say that you are bad, I'm moving out. It's a relationship. कहते हैं, अभी भी तो शुरू किया है, right? So, like, because normally the mentorship is for 3 months or 2 months, right? So you have to, walk your commitment, right? So whatever commitment you have made. So knowing that this was a bad mentorship, we still ensured that, we lived up to the word we had given. I think I would say that in a nutshell, you need to be very sincere and true to your purpose and safeguard the purpose from everyone else, including yourself. Right? So that is super critical. And for that, I think we need to also have a purity of mind and all of that. So I don't want to get into that zone, but also very important as social entrepreneurs, especially as social entrepreneurs, to also practice mindfulness, right? Because it's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough, rough ride, whichever way you look at it. Today, you may be having a good time, but tomorrow you don't know, right? So what will keep you sane is your ability to stay equanimous, right? So by the way, I'm into Vipassana and all of that, but I discovered it many years later after starting Rang De, right? But it's very powerful, right? It's very powerful, gives you a great context to look at things. And so I would strongly recommend some of these things, right? So you need to make yourself as an entrepreneur, as a social entrepreneur, or somebody who's getting into the social sector as a leader, very strong internally, and figure out what the purpose is, and then go with the flow, right? And not really get bogged down, saying, it's not working out, and give yourself time before you get into the social sector, enough time, because you can do a lot of desk research, online research. Now, you have AI also to help you, all of that. So do all of that, moonlight with AI if you want to, and then, jump into the social sector.
In the interest of time, I'm sorry, we'll have to, and we can carry on the conversations about coffee. So thank you, Ram. I'd like to invite Vidyasagar Adam to say a word of thanks to Ram before we leave. So,
Here.
please come.
Hi, I'm Vidyasagar. I've done the ILS's leadership program. Thank you, Ram, so much for describing in detail your journey, driven by passion and sense of purpose. I'm sure it will inspire some of us to make the crossover. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Vidyasagar.
Thank you, please. We'll break for coffee and tea and networking now. Unfortunately, it's a short break. We request you to come back at 12:20 for a very exciting session with Vinita on the Constitution and citizenship. So, thank you.